Welcome to your astrological forecast for the week of Monday, June 24th through Sunday, June 30th, 2024. Very exciting stuff. We are closing out the month, and really we're just beginning a new sign astrologically. We have gone through a lot of Gemini. It's really dramatic how different the chart is now compared to just a couple weeks ago. A couple weeks ago, remember, we had that huge Gemini stellium. At one point, there were 5 different planets in Gemini: Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, and Jupiter. And now the picture has dramatically changed. We have Mercury, Venus, and then now the Sun freshly in the sign of Cancer. We're kind of riding this high, so to speak, coming out of the summer solstice in the northern hemisphere, kicking off summer, kicking off Cancer season. So we're really kind of taking it back. We're bringing it back home and kind of coming back down to earth, sort of, if that makes sense. The last several weeks we were really branching out and spreading out and trying all these new different things and diversifying. That's what Gemini is all about. Very scattered, kind of all over the place, a very silly kind of detached energy. Again, now we're bringing it back home. Where's the feeling? None of this really matters if there's no feeling in it. Where's the emotional intelligence? When it comes to our thoughts, our actions, as well as our desires, these things are all represented by Mercury, Venus, and the Sun. All of these things are favoring more kind of emotional, sensual, sensitive pastimes and archetypes. And also, Cancer is very conservative. Cancer is very subjective. It cares about what matters to me and the people closest to me, right? Cancer is also a sign that it doesn't really like to take risks. It prefers to go with what has been working. What do I know the most already? What environments am I already the most familiar with? Okay, that's what we're more focusing on right now. So this may look very different depending on where Cancer falls in your chart. Is it at the top, the bottom, the left, the right? Obviously, that's going to be a huge difference. However, for all of us, Cancer represents familiarity. That's what Cancer loves. Cancer feels the most vibrant and active in those environments that are familiar to it already. So Cancer doesn't really like to branch out. It's very different than Gemini. So this is a huge transition. Depending on your astrology, maybe you had a great time in Gemini, maybe you're having a great time now, but either way, it's a huge difference, if that makes sense. For this week, the moon will be transiting from Aquarius through Taurus. Remember that the moon does take on a little bit more significance since it's literally ruling over the Sun as well as Mercury and Venus. We still have a pretty decent spread. We had such a cluster in Aries and Taurus, as you've probably heard me say many times. That was really dominating the charts for this first half of the year. But this is diversifying. It's spreading out, and it will continue to spread out. Again, Sun, Mercury, Venus, and Cancer. Eventually, Mars will slowly leave this cluster as well, and it will traverse Gemini and then Cancer as we get further into the year also. Okay. So this week's forecast should be a kind of short one because there's really 2 days that I want to focus on. This is the chart for Monday, June 24th. I just wanted to kind of show you, the general picture as we're starting out this week. There's nothing like specific I wanted to point out. Just wanted to show you the general picture. You can see, now I would say the short-term focus is definitely on Cancer. We still have Jupiter in Gemini, of course, and then not a whole lot has changed with Uranus and Mars in Taurus, and then, of course, North Node and Chiron in Aries, etc. Neptune, Saturn, Pisces. We still have this kind of loose cluster. But yeah, the only thing changing outside of Cancer is mainly the moon, which, of course, changes very often. But anyway, the 2 days I wanted to focus on are Friday and Saturday. So really, most of the activity, at least in terms of astrological aspects, is happening at the end of the week. Now, that doesn't mean that nothing is going to happen all week. It's just that in terms of exact astrological aspects, the latter part of the week is more active. The first thing I want to mention is Friday, June 28th. This is the chart for that day. And this is where we will experience a third quarter moon. This is one of the more potent, kind of extreme quarter moons. Remember, third quarter moons are a little bit more philosophical in nature. And I feel like people tune out when I talk about quarter moons, but this is important because it's in my opinion, it's very reminiscent of a full moon. Okay, quarter moons can be as intense as full moons, so I really don't understand why they're overlooked. Quarter moons represent crises in consciousness, particularly third quarter moons. So this is a third quarter moon. It means that the moon is 3/4 of the way through the cycle. I know that can be confusing because if you look at the moon right now on Friday, June 28th, it will appear half full. But even though you might want to call it a half moon, it's called a quarter moon because it's 3/4 of the way through the cycle. So hopefully that makes sense. It's actually kind of simple when you think about it that way. But basically, why am I talking about this? It's because the sun at 7 degrees Cancer will be squared by the moon when it reaches 7 degrees Aries. So they're basically clashing. They're forming this 90-degree aspect. They are having this direct line of communication, but in a way that is kind of in disagreement. They're arguing, they're battling, they're butting heads. What's weird about this quarter moon is the sun is in Cancer, which is kind of the moon's sign, right? The moon sign of domicile. And the moon is in Aries, which is the sign of the sun's exaltation. So it's kind of weird. It's almost like they're in each other's houses. No, the sun doesn't rule Aries, but it is exalted there. So Aries is kind of like the sun's vacation home. And so the moon is chilling in the sun's vacation home, and then the sun is hanging out in the moon's house. So it's like, it's kind of awkward, right? I mean, they're in each other's houses. They are connected. They're talking, but they're disagreeing. It's really weird. Both placements are a little bit out of character right now because the sun is almost acting more like the moon typically would. The sun is saying, let's be emotional and get in our feels and stick with what we know. That's typically how the moon would operate. And the moon is all brash and outgoing. It's in Aries. It's fiery. It's kind of acting like the sun, how the sun is supposed to act. So this is a weird one. And plus, like I said, with a third quarter moon aspect in general, that's already going to be kind of philosophical, a time to make some kind of change, some kind of action. So basically, when you put it all together, I think this means that there needs to be some kind of change for all of us. Again, this may look very different depending on your unique astrology and what's going on with you and your desires and your intentions and your placements. But generally speaking, on an abstract level, collectively, each of us needs to change something. Okay, you can look to where 7 degrees Aries or even 7 degrees Cancer as well. Where do those positions fall in your chart? That's where, if you are extra studious and want to really do your homework, you can see specifically for you where these changes will likely happen. But for all of us in general, it's just a time to make some kind of change. This may be philosophical in nature. So in other words, it may be about making some kind of physical change to your lifestyle, change, some kind of decision, some kind of new project. That could be it. But probably more often than not, like maybe at least 60% of the time, I think this is actually going to be more philosophical in nature. So maybe making some kind of change emotionally or mentally, some kind of change with your belief system, maybe learning something new, looking at your life a different way. I would say that's generally how it's going to be for most people. Will that spill over into, physical changes? Sure, of course. You can't separate the two. But generally speaking, I think this is more a change cerebrally, psychologically, emotionally. There's a lot of emotions going on. Even Aries, in my opinion, is a very emotional sign. And then plus, of course, all this lunar activity and Cancer activity, a lot of emotion. So maybe it's just about how do you feel right now? That can be a loaded question. Maybe I always say there's a lot of intelligence in emotion. And it's so much easier for us to just try to block out the emotion and not feel it. We don't want to feel it. We don't want to feel things that are uncomfortable, or, we don't want to be vulnerable. I think that's a huge part of the challenge here, especially if you have major placements around 7 degrees of the cardinal signs. This is going to affect you personally. So if you have major placements in Aries, Cancer, Libra, or Capricorn, specifically around 7 degrees, you're going to need to make a change. And I'm not telling you to do that. You can do whatever you want. I'm just saying that I think it would behoove us all to make a change, especially if we have major placements around those areas. Because if you don't, you're going to feel the need to make a change. You're going to feel anxious, restless. And that's something I say as well. People, animals, pets, children, we're all going to be like riled up, rowdy. It's reminiscent of a full moon, I'm telling you. So yeah. Kind of a weird energy. It's awkward, but it's a great time for making some kind of change, especially mentally, emotionally, spiritually, etc. Re-examine your intentions. It's always good to find some kind of excuse to re-examine your intentions. I know a lot of the non-physical and interdimensional entities I've spoken with are they're crazy about intentions. So I am I the best at following my own advice? Not really, but I preach it anyway. What are your intentions? And Friday's a great day for changing those types of things. Okay, there's something major happening on Saturday as well, and this one is actually much more gradual in nature. So when it comes to Friday, Friday is going to be a wild day. It's going to be crazy. Emotions are going to be up in the air, make some kind of change, yada yada. That could spill over into Thursday as well as Saturday, but it's mostly, acute. It's mostly centered on Friday. Saturday's main event, again, it's much more gradual in nature. It's going to be something slow. It's kind of in the background. You may not even necessarily notice it. It's really affecting this entire week and maybe much of next week as well. And what I'm talking about is Saturn turning retrograde or stationing retrograde, as we say in astrology. It's stationing retrograde at 19 degrees Pisces. And when I first wrote that down, I was actually almost kind of scared or intimidated. And it's not in the way that you think. If you're familiar with Saturn, Saturn has a bad rap in astrology. It's seen as, well, it's not just seen as, it is kind of dark. It's slow. It's depressing. It brings challenges and delays. It's not the most fun energy. It's not the sexiest energy. But Saturn is excellent at making us stronger, becoming wiser, all that stuff that we don't like to do, but we like, when we get there, we like it, right? We want to be strong. We want to be wise. It's just kind of tough to get there. That's what Saturn is all about. It brings the structure to things, right? So for instance, with Saturn in Pisces this last year or so, we've had a lack of structure. And I predicted this years ago. I said that Saturn in Pisces, along with Neptune in Pisces, would be kind of the breakdown of society, the breakdown of the structure. Things have been breaking down for a long time, but everybody knows it now. Also with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces, no one really knows what to believe. Some of us believe the mainstream news. I feel like not a lot. That's probably a particular generation. Some of us believe this, we believe that. Any viewpoint, you can find some kind of article supporting or some kind of article against it. People are literally arguing, like, is the world flat? Is it round? We don't know up from down. Do you know what I mean? Do you get what I'm saying? Like everything has become so divided and so confused and so upside down. We don't even know what's what anymore. That's Pisces. We're in a mini era of Pisces. That's Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. Everything is confused and very subjective. And, your viewpoints of the world almost say more about you than they actually say about the world, if that makes sense, because that's the nature of Pisces. It's reflective, it's backward, it's confusing, it's constantly changing, etc. So the reason why I'm talking about all that, it's not just a tangent. I'm talking about Saturn and Pisces. So there's been a lack of structure. But if you think this has been a lack of structure, Saturn turning retrograde, this is exactly why I'm intimidated by this, because as much as we might hate this, heavy structure and top-down energy of Saturn, it can be scary when it's not there. And with Saturn turning retrograde in Pisces, this is about the least amount of typical Saturn energy as you can possibly experience, if that makes sense. Because not only is Saturn in Pisces, so it's kind of like uncharacteristically loosey-goosey. Saturn is in joy in the 12th house, so I know this is kind of not maybe astrologically correct, but I think Saturn is in joy in Pisces. It's the easiest place to have Saturn because, again, it's the least structured sign. So putting, the planet of structure in the least structured sign, it's almost like Saturn is kind of like drunk or half awake. It's kind of, it's loosey-goosey. It's not the typical authoritative Saturn that I was going to say know and love. I don't know. Maybe there's a better word for that. So that's just Saturn in Pisces in general. But now adding Saturn in retrograde for the next few months, whenever a planet turns retrograde, it seems to kind of go to sleep. It's not that it's not there anymore. It's obviously still there. It's just that it affects us differently. It's acting out of character. You could say it's acting a little bit like, I don't know, inebriated maybe, or intoxicated. Its energies come to us in a more kind of spiritual, I would say kind of loosey-goosey way. There's no structure. It's more intuitive, more abstract, maybe more, backward. The energy goes inward or backward in nature, so we focus more on the past, etc. So hopefully you can kind of put two and two together and see where I'm going with this. For the next few months with Saturn retrograde in Pisces, there's going to be a complete lack of structure. So for example, like governments around the world could lose control. Any organization or society or tribe or even a family unit where there's like whoever's in power may kind of lose that power going forward, if that makes sense. We may kind of lose touch with what are the rules, the regulations, the traditions. All that kind of goes out the window with Saturn retrograde in Pisces, if that makes sense. We may also kind of go back and, Saturn in Pisces is all about re-evaluating, how do I put this? Like, re-evaluating spiritual structures, if that makes sense. Like, Saturn is structure, Pisces is spirituality. So where are the values? Where are the spiritual values, traditions, practices? With Saturn retrograde, we're really reevaluating all that and reevaluating our need for that. Do we even want that? Do we want to get away from that? Whatever. Again, it's hard for me to even describe because by its very nature, this transit is hard to pin down. It's loosey-goosey, etc. So yeah, this is a really interesting one, and we're really gonna feel this because Mercury, especially Venus, and also the Sun, they're all kind of loosely trining Saturn as Saturn is turning retrograde. Another thing too you have to remember is that when planets station direct, or in this case station retrograde, they become intensified. The slower a planet moves, the more intense it is. So for example, Pluto is super slow all the time. It's always really intense, right? The same thing goes for Saturn, which is Saturn's slow enough as it is, but it's slowing down even more as it stations retrograde. So that's really what we're going to experience on Saturday. Saturday is the peak of this intensity, re-examining things spiritually. You may experience this, especially if you have placements in Pisces around 19 degrees. But for most of us, this is going to be more like historical. It's going to be felt on a more societal level. So I would pay special attention to maybe headlines or things in the news. It may be especially funky, just things kind of happening out of left field. And it wouldn't surprise me again if, the main theme is the structure losing control. There's no structure. There's no rhyme or reason. So for, different alliances may kind of fall through, different plans may fall through. No one really has any control. Everything's very slippery. I'm almost picturing like a kitchen in a restaurant, and for some reason, like everything, maybe there's like water everywhere or soap or like oil, and everyone's just dropping things and like falling and hitting, bumping into each other. It's just chaos. It's chaos. That's what I'm kind of predicting on a world stage. And there are, just like anything in astrology, there are pros and cons to this. Different type of top-down hierarchies and structures. Maybe it's good that those things are crumbling. The chaos that may ensue without that could be difficult. That could be its own kind of animal or creature, if that makes sense. But it just depends. We're moving away from this structure. And also, this is the type of thing where it's not that someone is coming in and like destroying the structure necessarily. It's almost like the structure just kind of like dissipates. Like this is the energy of Neptune. It's the energy of Pisces that we're talking about, if that makes sense. So things are just like becoming very fluid. It's almost like, different kinds of empires and bureaucracies can kind of crumble under their own weight, if that makes sense. Or even like individuals that are in power and controlling everything. Sometimes no one can defeat them but themselves. Sometimes the more power they get, the closer it gets them to eventually just destroying themselves, and they just implode. That's the energy we're talking about here. We're talking about dysfunction. There could also be natural events involving weather, poisons, liquids, acids, things that are like dissolving in nature or breaking down, etc. So kind of a wild one, kind of a mixed bag, but yeah, that was definitely very fun to interpret. I don't know how fun it will be to experience, but let's see. Okay, so that's what I have for you for this week. Thank you so much for listening, you beautiful people. Next week, there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on. Neptune turns retrograde next. Like one by one, these planets have been turning retrograde. Mercury will move into Leo, so I'm looking forward to that. Mercury's traveling very fast right now, so it's making lots of contacts and already leaving Cancer. And we have a new moon in Cancer as well. So I hope you join me next week. And thank you so much for hanging out with me. I'll see you later.